Hi and welcome. Let's get started with Microsoft Excel. Imagine that you've been asked to analyze sales data from a large data set. You can use Microsoft Excel to focus on smaller sets of data and make your job easier. Excel is a powerful tool that can help you organize and visualize data. You will see that the more you use these Excel capabilities, the more easily you will perform your work. You'll explore a variety of features and get an opportunity to try them out for yourself. You'll cover how to work with data and how to better organize and visualize it. In this module, you will learn how to create and modify tables, use table references, manage large workbooks, visualize data with basic charts, and analyze data. These are some of the core skills that will help you work more efficiently in Microsoft Excel. Have you ever wanted to analyze smaller sets of data within a large workbook or break down large sets of data into smaller parts? If you have, you would probably find it handy to convert your data into tables. That's exactly the issue Thomas Bradshaw is facing now at Westcal Publishing. Thomas has been tasked with analysing some sales figures. Westcal has a large amount of sales data, but Thomas needs to focus on smaller sets of data. This context is ideal for using tables and making use of Excel's powerful organizational capabilities without modifying the data itself. Using tables will help Thomas analyze the sales figures he's been asked to. Let's see how we will be able to accomplish that task. With this scenario in mind, by the end of this lesson you should be able to identify the components of a table, create a table using the Create Table dialog box, use and apply table styles as well as quick styles, and customize row display. So let's jump right into it and explore tables to see how Thomas can work smarter with smaller sets of data by creating, formatting and modifying tables. A table is a specially designated range of information that has added functionality. If you need to analyze smaller sets of data within a large workbook or break down large sets of data into smaller parts, then converting your data into tables is often the best solution. When you work with tables, you can use Excel's powerful organizational capabilities without modifying the data itself. With tables, you can narrow down specific data and focus on only the important information. Let's now take a closer look at tables. You can create tables from existing data ranges or from empty ranges and then populate them afterwards. When you create a table in Excel, it will automatically be given a generic name such as Table 1 or Table 2, depending on the number of tables present in your workbook. But don't worry, you can change these names at any time. You should also note that tables are flexible in that you can convert your table back to a normal range at any point without affecting the contents. A table is made from adjacent columns of data with a unique label or heading for each column. Columns and rows may be added to a table just as you would when working with a normal range. Keep in mind that each worksheet has a lot more rows than columns. This design is well suited for data organized in long adjacent lists like columns. Now, to better understand tables, let's have a look at the components that come together to create a table. Now let's look at the table components. They make your table look more organized and easier to read. The table you just saw has some of its components selected. When you don't select any of the components, your table looks like a plain list of rows and columns. Let's start using some of the table components to see how different your table looks. First, let's look at the header row option. You can include a header row that displays the column headers or names for each column in your table by clicking the header row checkbox. For each header within the header row, you will see the header row drop-down arrow. You can use it to access filter and sort commands. Now, when you're working with a large table, it may be hard to visualize and understand your data. But if you click the banded rows checkbox, you can easily differentiate between each row that appears within your table. Let's suppose you want to display the results of calculations that are done on a column-by-column basis. To accomplish that, you can click the Total Row checkbox. When you select Total Row, it also includes the Total Row drop-down arrow. If you click the drop-down arrow, you can quickly access functions that can perform calculations on your table data. Finally, if you want to emphasize the first column, you can select the First Column checkbox. This option applies a bold effect to the first column of your table to differentiate it from other columns. And if you apply the Last Column option, it will do the same thing to the last column of data. Now that you've seen what the table components are, let's explore how to create a table. Perhaps the easiest way to create a table is to use the Create Table dialog box to convert existing ranges of data into a table. To access this dialog box, select the cell range that you would like to convert into a table and then click Insert Table. This will open the Create Table dialog box. You will see the selected range using absolute cell references in the text box, "Where is the data for your table?" You can enter a different range into the provided field or select one with your mouse by clicking the Cell Selector button. If you click the My Table Has Headers checkbox, it indicates that the first row in the selected range contains column names. If your data does not have headers or column names, Excel inserts a header row and gives the columns generic names of column followed by a sequential number. When you click the OK button, Excel converts the selected cell range into a table. Alright, we've covered how to create tables, which can help Thomas focus on smaller sets of data for his sales data project. But it would be nice if he could show that data in a more organised and professional manner. To accomplish that, let's explore how Thomas can format tables. Let's start with the Table Design Contextual tab and briefly explore the various groups, commands and options that they contain. Let's start with the groups. They are Properties Group, the Tools Group, the External Table Data Group, the Table Style Options Group, and the Table Styles Group. Now let's explore each one of them. Whenever you're working with a table, the Table Design Contextual tab appears on the ribbon. Using the controls on this tab, you can modify just about any aspect of your table. In the Properties group, you can view and edit the current table's name. You should always name your table so that you will know what it is. One of the benefits of naming your table is that the table name is visible from anywhere in the workbook, so you can refer to it in formulas, for example. And keep in mind that rules for naming tables are the same as the rules for naming cells. You can also redefine the table size using the Resize Table command. Within the Tools group, you can remove duplicate values from your table using the Remove Duplicates command. You can use the Summarize with Pivot Table command to create a pivot table out of the current table. You will cover pivot tables in an upcoming lesson. And you can use the Convert to Range command to convert it back to a regular range. You can also insert a slicer into the table using the Insert Slicer command. A slicer is a graphic that you can add to the worksheet to filter the table data. It's a good effect for presentation of results to others and makes it easier for the others to refine the data in the table. You can use the commands in the External Table Data group to export table data to other applications, as well as manage data links to external resources. Similarly, you can use the checkbox controls in the Table Style Options group to toggle on or off available table components. Finally, you can use the gallery of styles displayed in the Table Styles group and apply them to the current table. Now that you have explored the Table Design Contextual tab, let's see how Thomas can format his table to show sales data in a more professional way. Similar to cell styles, table styles are pre-configured formatting options that can be applied to tables. With table styles, you can quickly apply a splash of color to your tables and in some cases enhance their readability. While you do have the option of configuring your own table style, you can also select from a variety of pre-configured quick styles. You can find all of these quick styles within the Table Styles group of the Table Design tab. If you click the More arrow within the Table Styles gallery, it expands it to show more options. When you click any style option inside the Table Styles gallery, it gets applied to the current table. Finally, to clear an applied style, you can click the More arrow within the Table Styles gallery and then click Clear. The table is then displayed with no style at all. You've just seen how to apply styles to tables so Thomas can present them in a more professional manner. Let's now look at how Thomas can customize row display. You can customize rows in a table through the enabling or disabling of banded rows and the inclusion of total rows. If you want to toggle banded rows, first select the table that you would like to work with and then click the Banded Rows checkbox in the Table Style Options group. Banded rows are enabled by default to make the data easier to read, but you can always choose to disable it. If you click the Total Row checkbox in the Table Style Options group, it inserts a total row at the bottom of the table. When the total row is shown, you will see that it appears bold and one or more of the columns will display a total. Now that you've learned how to create and format tables, you have access to many tools that will help Thomas to quickly organise and manage the sales data. Next, you will learn how to resize a table and how to quickly summarize your data. You will also learn how to clean your data by removing duplicates. After you create a table in Excel, there are many ways that you can easily add or remove table rows and columns. Let's see how you perform these actions. You can add rows at the bottom of the table by simply selecting any cell immediately below the table and start typing your data. When you're done, you can press Enter or Tab or select a cell outside of the table, and Excel automatically expands the table to include the new row. The new row will include any formulas that are used in the table. Similarly, if you select a cell immediately to the right of a table and enter data, Excel automatically expands the table to include the new column. This functionality is called Table Auto Expansion. It is one of Excel's dynamic elements. For example, if you had created a chart based on the table, when new information is added, it means that the information will automatically appear in the chart. In most situations, this is a positive, but you can switch it off if you wish. You can control the table auto expansion behavior by clicking on the Control Autocorrect Options button that appears next to added row or column and selecting the appropriate option. If you select the Undo Table Auto Expansion, it removes the column or row from the table. But the data you entered remains, and the Autocorrect Options button is still displayed, allowing you to select Redo Table Auto Expansion. Now, if you select the Control Autocorrect options, it launches the Autocorrect dialog box where, on the Auto Format as you type tab, you can set your preferences for automatically including new rows and columns in tables and automatically filling formulas in tables. And if you select Stop Automatically Expanding Tables after clicking the Autocorrect Options button, the Autocorrect Options button is no longer visible when you're working on your tables. To open the Autocorrect dialog box, just click File, then Options, and then select the Proofing category in the Excel Options dialog box and click Autocorrect Options. Now let's see how you can delete rows and columns. You can delete rows or columns by clicking Home, then Delete, then selecting either Delete Table Rows or Delete Table Columns. You can also adjust the size of your table by clicking Table Design, then Resize Table. This action opens the Resize Table dialog box, where you can define the new range of your table. Keep in mind that the headers must remain in the same row, and the resulting table range must overlap the original table range. Finally, you can add or remove rows and columns by right-clicking a cell in the table and selecting from the available options in the menu. You probably remember that we discussed earlier in the lesson that you can add a total row to your tables by clicking the Total Row checkbox in the Table Style Options group of the Table Design Contextual tab. Now we will explore some of the functions that are available in this row to help Thomas analyse and summarise Westcal sales data. When you select any cell in the total row, it displays the Total Row drop-down arrow, which provides function options for calculating the total for that particular column. You can select from all the Excel functions for total row calculations by selecting More Functions from the Total Row Cell drop-down menu. This opens the Insert Function dialog box. If you want, you can also count the number of salespeople in your table. However, you should note that the functions that you select are not necessarily the functions that are used to display the value. In this example, if we select cell E15, the sum of the weekly goal column, we will see in the formula bar that the function used is actually subtotal. Subtotal functions are used to perform calculations on only subsets of data within a range or table. In this case, it is particularly useful to display the table total values when filters are applied to the table. Now let's cover an example in which a filter has been applied to hide several of the sales representatives. In this case, the results in the total row only reflect the data that is visible after the filter is applied. However, if you prefer, you can manually enter functions in the total row cells. You can set the weekly goal column total to be a true sum function, showing the total for all rows, while the weekly sales column remains a subtotal function, only showing the total for the rows that are not hidden. Now that you have seen how the subtotal function is used in the total row, let's cover some more detail on its syntax and arguments. You use function_num argument to define other functions that you would like to use to calculate subtotals. Functions are called using numeric values of 1 to 11 when including hidden values, and 101 to 111 when excluding them. Hover over subtotal and mention that this function is put in automatically in a table because it works well with filters. It's also a function that you can use anywhere else in the worksheet. Hover over the number and mention that this decides the function used to generate the subtotal. For example, 2 is count and 9 is sum, but the screen tip help when you're typing the formula will give a list of these to choose from. Notice that if you choose 9 here, it will sum using only the visible data, but if you use 109, it will sum and include the hidden data. However, if the subtotal is used on a block of filtered data, it will also focus on the visible data regardless of which version you choose. Hover over the Ref 1. This is where you indicate the cells, range, or column that you want to subtotal. If you're using subtotal in a table, the table column names will have to be enclosed in square brackets so that the formula knows it is working with the columns and not the individual cells. Each value calls a function in the function_num argument. For example, value 1 calls the average function, including hidden values in the calculation. In contrast, value 101 also calls the average function, but excluding hidden values in the calculation. We've provided a table that tells you which value calls which function in the function_num argument. It is available as a reading material right after this video. The reference arguments, ref1, ref2, etc., identify the ranges that you want to subtotal. Now let's think about this scenario. What if the sales figures that Westcal gave Thomas contains duplicate values? He should be able to identify and remove these values accurately. That's when another important Excel tool comes in: remove duplicates. It is true that duplicate values in data can be a common occurrence, especially in large data sets where data has originated from multiple sources, and they can be difficult to identify when dealing with many columns and rows. It is important, however, to identify and remove duplicates from your data to ensure accuracy and that your analyses are correct. While there are many strategies for identifying and removing duplicate data, Excel has a built-in function to remove duplicate values from tables or ranges that can be very effective. Let's look at how Thomas can use the Remove Duplicates function. Click anywhere inside of your table, then click Table, Design, Remove Duplicates. You can also access this function by clicking Data, then Remove Duplicates when working with ranges. These actions will display the Remove Duplicates dialog box. Now you can select the columns that contain the duplicates that you would like to remove. Please note that by default, all of the columns in the table will be selected. Make sure you use caution when selecting only some of the columns, as it may create a situation where you can unintentionally delete data that is not a duplicate. Sometimes you may have more than one instance of a value in the dataset, but only 2 of the rows are identical across all of the columns. You should be extra careful whenever you are removing duplicates and using only some of the columns to define them. After you select the columns, click OK in the Remove Duplicates dialog box. Any duplicate value that is found is then removed. An information box appears that informs you of the number of duplicate values found and how many unique values remain. You've learned that Thomas was able to focus on smaller sets of sales data at Westcal by creating, formatting and modifying tables. Now you'll see that Thomas can make his job even simpler by using table names and structured references. In our scenario, if Thomas gives his table a unique name that clearly describes the purpose or use of the table, he makes the structure of his workbook and the formulas he uses easier to understand. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to name a table, use structured references, use database functions, and convert a table back to a range. Let's start by exploring how you can name tables. You can name tables in several different ways. You will recall that you can apply names to cells and ranges to help you create workbooks that are easy to understand and work with. When you create a table, Excel automatically names it with a generic name like Table 1, Table 2, and so on, depending on how many existing tables you have in your workbook. The simplest way to name a table is to first click anywhere into the table, which causes the Table Design contextual ribbon to appear. On the left, you will see a name box, and you can type the name you would like to assign to the table there. Keep in mind that the rules for naming a table are ones that you've come across before. The name must not be assigned to anything else in the workbook. You cannot include spaces, it must begin with text, but you can include letters and numbers, and it's not case sensitive. You can also open the Name Manager dialog box to edit your table name by clicking Formulas and then Name Manager. Then, in the Name Manager dialog box, you can select and edit your table name. In the Edit Name dialog box, you can edit the table name and also add comments that help you and other users understand the use of the table. You will notice, though, that the refers to field is grayed out, because unlike a range, table size is dynamic, so it cannot be set using the name manager. You just learned how Thomas can make his workbooks easier to understand and work with by naming tables. Table names make formulas easier because the name is visible from anywhere in the workbook, but they need to be referred to in a particular way. Now you'll see how we can reference tables and their elements by creating structured references. You can use a structured reference, also known as a table reference, to reference tables and their elements using a combination of table and column names instead of cell addresses. This special syntax is used in tables because they are dynamic and normal cell references cannot adjust as tables are modified. Here are some benefits of structured references. You can easily create them by selecting the table elements you want to refer to. They update automatically when elements of the table are changed. You can use them inside and outside of the table, which can make your workbooks easier to understand. They take advantage of the autofill feature of autocorrect, filling the entire column of a table with a formula after entering it in just one cell. This is known as a calculated column. Let's say that there is an open column in your table that is used to calculate the dollar amount that a sales representative was over or under their weekly goal. You can calculate this column using structured references. Let's do that. First, select cell F5 and type the equal sign in the formula bar. Then click on cell D5 to automatically add the structured reference using the column name. In this case, open square bracket, at open square bracket again, then weekly sales, then close square bracket and close square bracket again. Now let's complete the formula by typing the minus sign, then click on cell E5. Again, note that Excel adds the structured reference using the column name. Now you press Enter to complete the formula. Not only do the formula results appear in cell F5, but it is also autofilled to all the cells in the over/under column. You can also use structured references in formulas outside of a table. You can have a field to show the number of sales representatives who have not reached their weekly goal. You could use normal cell references to create this formula, but if the table gets larger or changes, the formula may no longer refer to the correct cells. When you use structured references, you ensure that the calculation is always correct. Let's continue and create this structured reference outside of a formula. First, you select cell H5, then use the COUNTIF function by typing equal sign COUNTIF, then open parentheses, open double quotation mark. For the range argument, select the column with the values you want to count, if they match the criteria argument. In this case, you select the range D5 through D14. Because the formula is outside of the table, the reference contains not only the column name, weekly sales, but also the table name, sales, or sales, open square bracket again, weekly sales, close square bracket, and close square bracket again. To complete the formula, type a comma to move to the next argument, then type a less than symbol in parentheses, then an ampersand, then click on cell E5, and finally type a closing square bracket and press Ctrl-Shift-Enter. When you let Excel define the structured reference by selecting cells and ranges, it greatly simplifies the process of using these formulas. The syntax may seem complicated and can be confusing at first, but as you become more familiar with tables and structured references, you will come to understand them better and appreciate their value in complex workbooks. You've just seen that Thomas can make his work much simpler by using table names and structured references. Now let's see how he can use database functions to perform operations on a smaller set of data. Database functions are similar to subtotal functions in that you can use them to perform common operations on a specified subset of data. However, one difference is that unlike with the subtotal function, where the criteria is whether the data is hidden or not, with database functions you use criteria for the data in each column of your data set. The syntax of a typical database functions is equal sign, dcount, open parentheses, database comma, field comma, criteria, close parentheses. Let's say that you've decided to use a database function to perform an operation on a subset of your data. Before you create your database function, you must first define the criteria you'll be using somewhere within your workbook, using column names that exactly match the column names of your database. You can have a range with all of the column names, but have only added criteria for the quantity and order price columns. For example, if you want to find out how many orders there are in the database where the quantity is less than 10 and the order price is greater than 200, you first select the cell where you want to enter the function. Now you need to define the database argument. To do that, select the full range or table of data. Or you can also use structured references. Just start typing your table name and the Excel autocomplete function suggests available table names. You can use the arrow keys to select your table and press Tab to apply it. To continue defining your table, type an open square bracket, then use the arrow keys to select #all. Press Tab to apply it and then type a closed square bracket. When you're using structured references, this action describes the entire contents of your table, including headings, data, and total rows. After you've entered a comma to move to the next argument, you define the field argument by selecting the full column that contains the items you want to count. Or in the case of a table, you can click the table header and Excel inserts the structured reference in at the function. And here's a quick tip. When you are creating formulas, especially with structured references, try look for and use the screen tips that are displayed next to the elements of your formulas in the Formula Autocomplete menus. Now you define the final argument criteria by selecting the cells that contain all of the column names and related criteria. For example, you can select the range A1 through D2 and finally type a closed square bracket to complete the function and then press Enter. The function counts one order where the quantity is less than 10 and the order price is greater than 200. Now that you created the function, if you change the criteria in the criteria range, it changes the criteria for the function. For example, if you change the quantity to less than 50, it shows that there are 10 orders in the data set where the quantity is less than 50 and the order price is greater than 200. Because the function is built to include criteria for all of the columns, you can set the criteria any way you like. In this example, there are 7 orders with a unit price of less than 100 and an order price of greater than 200. We created a list with the available database functions that gives you the flexibility to perform many common operations on a specified subset of your data. It is available as a reading material right after this video. By now you have learned how to create tables and how to use them so that Thomas can accomplish his task more easily. Now you will learn how to convert a table back to a range. There may be times when you decide that using a table for your data is not the best option for your purposes. In these cases, it is simple to remove the table structure from your data. To convert your table to a range, first select any cell within the table. Then, click the table design and then convert to range. An information window appears asking you to confirm that you want to convert your table to a range. Click Yes. After you convert your table to a range, the table features such as the sort and filter arrows are no longer available for this data, but the table style formatting and the total row remain, and all structure references will be converted to cell references. In this lesson, you learned how to organize your worksheet data with tables. You can now create, format, and modify tables. You can also use structured references, as well as the subtotal and database functions. Taking advantage of all these tools will enable you to learn more about your data than ever before. You've learned that Thomas was able to create, format and modify tables to focus on smaller sets of data. Then he was able to use table names, structured references and database functions to make his job even simpler. Now you'll explore how Thomas can more easily navigate large workbooks so that he can find the sales data he needs to accomplish his task. Thomas was handed large workbooks, which can be hard to navigate to find the information he needs. This is a good scenario for Thomas to learn how to format worksheet tabs, manage worksheets and view worksheets and workbooks in different ways. With this scenario in mind, by the end of this lesson you will be able to format worksheet tabs, manage worksheets and manage the view of worksheets and workbooks. Let's start with our scenario. Thomas has large workbooks to work with to extract the sales data he wants to focus on, which can present unique challenges, especially with navigation. Let's explore how Thomas can format worksheet tabs and give them individual names and appearances. You will start by learning how to rename worksheet tabs. If you want to change the name of a worksheet tab, right-click on the tab you want to rename and then click Rename. Note that in a worksheet tab name you can include text, numbers, spaces, capital letters and up to a maximum of 31 characters. You can't include some symbols like /, /, question mark, asterisk, colon, open square bracket and close square bracket. Also, you can't call a sheet history, as this word is reserved for internal use in Excel. Next, type the name you would like to give this tab and press Enter. The new name will be applied. To rename a worksheet even faster, you can also double-click the tab name. You can also change the color of a worksheet tab to make it even more identifiable. To do that, right-click the tab that you want to change and click Tab Color and select your preferred color. Note that the color is not obvious on the tab when you set it. It's designed to be vibrant and visible when you're not in that sheet. And here's a quick tip. You can change the color of multiple sheets at once by holding the Control key and clicking each tab to select them as a group first. You can also use the Select All Sheets command in the right-click menu to select all sheets in the workbook for modification. And you can also find both the tab color and rename commands on the Home tab under the Format drop-down menu. Now that you have learned how Thomas can name and format his worksheet tabs, let's explore how he can manage his worksheets. When you are working with large workbooks, you may find that you need to change the order of the worksheets, insert new ones, and delete others. You may also want to hide worksheets or refer to cells that appear on other worksheets. You will explore these topics now. In Excel, you can group worksheets together so that you can edit two or more at the same time. If you apply formatting to the group, it will then automatically be applied to any worksheets contained in your group. To group two or more worksheets together, hold down the Control key in your keyboard and then click on the tabs for each worksheet that you would like to include in the group. After you've selected all of the worksheets that you would like to include in the group, release the Control key. You will notice that each worksheet tab that you selected now has a white background. Note that the title bar will show the workbook name followed by the word group. You can remove worksheets from a group by holding down the Control key and clicking on the tabs for the worksheets that you would like to remove. And here are two tips that can be useful. You can select all worksheets at once by right-clicking any worksheet tab and clicking Select All Sheets. And you can also click the Ungroup Sheets command in the same location to ungroup all of the currently grouped sheets. Excel is very flexible in how you can move worksheets around in your workbook. You can even move worksheets from one workbook to another. The quickest way to reposition a worksheet within the same workbook is to click and drag on the Worksheet tab. A small page icon will appear under your mouse pointer and a black triangle will indicate the new position of the sheet. After you position your mouse, release your mouse button. The worksheet will be repositioned. Now, if you are moving a worksheet between workbooks, right-click on the tab for the worksheet that you would like to move and click Move or Copy. In the Move or Copy dialog box, you can choose the workbook to which you would like to move this worksheet, using the To Book menu, or you can choose the position of the sheet. Note that in order to move a worksheet to another workbook, you must have that workbook open. You should also note that the default setting is to move. You must tick the Copy checkbox if you want to copy from one workbook to another. You will notice that Excel is very flexible in that you can add or remove worksheets from your workbook at any time you want. You can insert a new worksheet by clicking the Insert Worksheet button, the one with the plus sign next to the worksheet tabs. Or you can click Home, then Insert, and then Insert Sheet. You can also find this command on the Context menu when you right-click an existing worksheet tab. Now, if you want to delete a worksheet, make sure that the worksheet you would like to delete is open, and then click Home, then Delete, and then Delete Sheet. Or you can right-click the tab for the worksheet and then click Delete. In either case, a warning dialog box will appear asking you to confirm that you want to delete the selected worksheet. Click Delete to complete the process. But be careful. If you delete a sheet with content in it, this action cannot be reversed by undo. Now, if you are saving to a local drive, you could exit without saving perhaps, but if you are saving in the cloud, this would not be possible. And if the worksheet that you are deleting is blank, no warning dialog box will be displayed and the worksheet will be immediately deleted. If you are working with a workbook that includes a lot of worksheets, it can quickly become cluttered. To help alleviate this problem and allow you to focus on and quickly access the worksheets that matter, you can choose to hide selected worksheets. When you hide worksheets, they are not deleted and still operate normally, they are just hidden from view. But that is not a security feature. Anyone who can access the workbook can potentially unhide the sheets. Let's now see how you can hide a worksheet. To hide the currently active worksheet, click Home, then Format, then Hide and Unhide, and then Hide Sheet. Or you can right-click on the Worksheet tab that you would like to hide and click Hide. And after you hide the worksheet, it will be completely hidden from view and you will no longer be able to select its Worksheet tab. To unhide a worksheet, click Home, then Format, then Hide and Unhide, then Unhide Sheet. After you click Unhide Sheet, it will display the Unhide dialog box. This dialog box will list any worksheets that are currently hidden. Click to select the sheet that you would like to unhide and then click OK. The sheet that was hidden will now be visible and its tab will be displayed in its previous position. When you construct a formula, you can refer to any cell or cell range within any worksheet in the current workbook. These worksheet references declare the worksheet name followed by an exclamation mark followed by the regular cell reference. For example, you can have a formula that adds two numbers from different sheets. You just type the equal sign, sheet 3, exclamation mark, A1, the plus sign, sheet 4, exclamation mark, C4, and then press enter. In this lesson, you've learned how Thomas can name and format his worksheet tabs and how he can manage his worksheets. Now let's explore how he can manage the view of worksheets and workbooks. Thomas has a number of workbooks that he needs to open at the same time. He also needs to work with multiple worksheets. He can use some Excel features that may help him manage his windows and workbooks. This is what you will explore now. When you are working with large amounts of data, it is sometimes convenient to be able to keep an eye on one part of a spreadsheet, such as column headers or titles, while simultaneously viewing or scrolling through other parts of the same spreadsheet. You can do this using the Freeze feature. If you want to use Freeze, open a workbook window and click View, then Freeze Panes. All cells above and/or to the left of the solid grey lines will remain visible when you scroll through your data. Cells to the right and/or below will move with the scroll bars. First, let's look at the Freeze Panes option. If you select cells before clicking this option, everything to the left of and above the selection will remain frozen. Next, the Freeze Top Row option will keep the top row frozen. Since many top rows in a worksheet contain column headings, the column headings will remain visible while you scroll vertically through the data. Finally, the Freeze First column will keep the first column frozen. You can use this option to keep row headings visible while you scroll horizontally through the data. When you are finished using the Freeze Panes command, click Freeze Panes, then Unfreeze Panes. Now that you've learned about the Freeze option, let's explore the Split command. You can use the Split command to view 4 different areas of a worksheet at the same time. It is similar to the Freeze command, except that you have the option to scroll through all of the parts of the window that are frozen. Before you add a split, click the location in your data where you want the split to be added. For example, click the cell where you want to add a split. Next, click View, then Split. This command acts like a toggle. Click to activate or deactivate the split. After you click Split, you will see borders appear around the selected cell, dividing the worksheet into 4 parts. Each split operates in its own area. The top left, top right sides share the same vertical scroll bar. The bottom left, bottom right sides share the same vertical scroll bar. The top left, bottom left sides share the same horizontal scroll bar. The top right, bottom right sides share the same horizontal scroll bar. Note that the right, bottom right sides share the same horizontal scroll bar. If you want to remove the split, click the Split command again. And to move the split, click and drag the center of the divider wherever you like. Now let's explore the Switch Windows command. If you have multiple workbooks open at the same time, you can access them from the same Excel window. One method you can use to access open workbooks is to use the icons on the Windows taskbar to switch between the different files. When you hover your mouse over the Excel icon in the taskbar, it will display the open workbooks. You can then hover over any of the workbooks to display it on the screen and click to make it active. You can also click View, then Switch Windows to select from open workbooks. The file name with a check mark beside it is the one that is currently visible. Click an unchecked name to view that file. Finally, let's look at the New Window command. To view the current worksheet in another active workbook window, click View, then New Window. This command creates a new window of the active workbook. You can identify each window of the workbook by looking at the title bar. Each window will have a dash and a number to identify the version of the workbook. When you are finished working with multiple windows, simply click the Close button in the top right-hand corner of the Excel window to close each instance. When there is only one window remaining, the title bar will no longer show a dash and a version number. And here's an important note. When you create a new window of a workbook, it does not create a duplicate file, just a new window to look at the same file. Any change you make to the workbook in one of the windows will immediately be reflected in the others. In this lesson, you learn some of the various ways that you can manage large workbooks in Microsoft 365 Excel. You explored how to format worksheet tabs, group worksheets, manage worksheets, and view worksheets in different ways. You should now be able to work with larger workbooks in a much more efficient and effective manner. You might have noticed that you find it easier to understand something when someone has used patterns or colours and shapes to explain difficult concepts. Now you can use data visualization to help tell your reader a story. In this lesson, Excel will help you to turn numbers into visuals through the use of charts. You will learn how to create charts, modify and format charts, and add and format advanced chart elements. In this scenario, Thomas must interpret data for reporting purposes. To help him interpret this data, he needs to learn how to select and create charts in Excel. This will help him to save time and interpret the data quickly so that he can report the findings to his line manager. Let's help Thomas get started. A chart is a graphical representation of data and how the data relates to each other in a data set in Excel. There are many different chart types that you can choose from in Excel. Each of these charts are customized to display specific types of data. Making the right chart selection for your data will help you to communicate your data clearly and accurately. Let's take a look at an example. Here you have data that represents sales figures in various divisions of an organization. For this example, you can use a pie chart to graphically represent the sales figures in the spreadsheet. The pie chart shows that Division A generates the most sales, while Division D generates the least. Thomas wants to present his sales data using columns, but he isn't sure if this will work. To create a chart, the first step is to select your data across the set of cells in your worksheet. Remember to include the row or column header. Now, click the Insert tab. Here you will see that the chart section has a wide selection of charts that Thomas can use to visualize his data. Then, click on any one of the chart options in the Charts group to select your chart. Like Thomas, you may not be sure which type of chart to use. In this case, you can click on the Recommended Charts tab. The Insert Chart dialog box opens and you can scroll through the list of charts that Excel recommends for your data. Click on any chart to see how your data may look. The choice at the top of the list is the one that Excel considers to be the most suitable. You can also access recommended charts from the Insert Chart dialog box by clicking on the Option button in the Charts group. If you still don't see a chart that you like, you can click All Charts to see all available chart types. When you find the chart you like, double-click on it. Once you have inserted your chart, you can move it to any position on your worksheet. You can also change the size of the chart for a better fit. To move your chart, click to select the chart and drag it to the location that you want. If you are happy with the location of the chart, release your mouse button. Now, if you want to resize the overall size of your chart, click to select it, then click the Format tab. In the Size group, you can enter the exact height and width of the chart to resize it. To resize the chart manually, click the chart and then drag the sizing handles to the size that you want. Alternatively, you can resize your chart using the Format Chart Area task pane. To do this, click the Option button in the Size group. The Format Chart Area dialog box opens. Type the height and width of your chart in the boxes to change its size. After creating a chart, you might need to add additional data to the chart. First, click to select the chart. The data range now appears outlined and shaded in your worksheet. Now, click and drag the resize handles of the data outlines. This lets you choose which data you would like to include in the chart. If you want to include an additional line of information, click and drag the resize handle downwards. Division F is immediately included in your chart. Now that you have added additional information, you may want to switch between rows and columns so that your chart represents the data more accurately. Here your chart shows the stock keeping unit of SKU sales by month. The columns are grouped by the SKU number and each column in the group represents a month in the quarter. You prefer to group the data by month and want each column to represent a SKU. So how can you change this? First, click the Chart Design tab and then click the Select Data option. Now click the Switch Row Column button to make the month the horizontal axis. Click the OK button. This applies the new changes and your chart's horizontal axis now shows the months. Now Thomas has a good idea on how to create charts that will provide the line managers with information that is easier to understand. Later, you'll have the opportunity to practice creating your own chart in Excel. Now that you've created a chart, you can modify and format it. When you want to modify a chart, you can add or remove certain chart elements or change your chart type. Formatting, on the other hand, means changing what your chart looks like. You can apply a variety of formatting techniques to change or add elements such as colours, layout or style. Excel also allows you to add chart elements such as chart titles, legends and data labels to make your chart easier to read. The number of chart elements in your chart depends on the chart type that you have chosen. In this example, there are 6 elements displayed on your chart. At the top of the chart, you find the chart's title. Next, you have the chart's grid lines. These are the grey lines running behind the columns. Then the data series representing all the data in the graph. On the right-hand side, you have the legend. This element explains the colours used in the chart. At the bottom of the chart is the data table. This element is optional and not automatically included in every chart type. The final element in this chart are the axis titles. Axis titles are typically available for all axes that can be displayed in a chart. Remember, elements will differ depending on the type of chart you have selected. If you want to change chart elements or the design of your chart, you can easily modify these in Excel. Click on your chart. The Chart Design Contextual tab becomes available. You can now change the design of your chart. In the Chart Layouts group, you can add or remove chart elements and change your chart's layout. You can also change colours and apply various chart styles. In the Data group, you can change the chart's dataset range and switch row and column data. If you want to change the chart type, select Change Chart Type in the Type group. And finally, if you want to move charts between worksheets in the current workbook, select Move Chart in the Location group. Now you can change the look of your chart by formatting it. Click on your chart to select it and then click on the Format Contextual tab. In the Format Contextual tab, you find the current selection control options. This allows you to select individual chart elements. Here you can access Format Selection. You can see that the dialog box opens on the right-hand side. When using complex charts, this is a good way to select items in a chart. Now select the Shape Styles option. Here you can change the shapes using the commands in the Shape Styles group. You can also modify the colour, outline and effects of the chart. If you want to change and format your chart's text, go to the Word Art Styles group and select an option. You can also change the order and orientation of the chart elements in the Arrange group. Finally, you can use the Size group to view and change the overall size of the chart that you have selected. As you've seen, there are a large number of choices on the contextual ribbons that allow you to change the look of your chart. But what if you don't have time and you simply need a quick way to make the chart look better and to stand out more? That is where chart styles are useful. They allow you to make your chart pop with only a couple of clicks. Let's see how this works. Select your chart on the Excel worksheet. Click the Chart Design Contextual tab. In the Chart Styles group, there is a gallery of different chart styles that you can choose from. Move your cursor over these chart styles and you will see a preview of how these styles look once they are applied to your chart. Click on any one of these options to change your chart style. Click on your chart again to select it. Now at the top right of the chart is the paintbrush icon. This is the Chart Styles button. Click this button to view the scrolling menu. It is the same menu of chart styles that you previewed earlier. You are now able to change the style of your chart very quickly and easily. You can also add or remove elements in a chart. To add a chart element, click the Add Chart Element command on the Design tab. Select the element you want from the drop-down menu. You can choose from chart titles, data labels, legends, and many more. If you want to access the chart elements quickly, click on the Chart Elements button in the top right-hand corner of your chart. You'll see the Chart Elements submenu. Select any one of the elements to modify your chart. You have explored various chart elements. Let's take a look at trend lines. A trend line is a straight or curved line element that can be added to your chart. It is typically used to show a trend over time. A trend line helps the reader to understand and interpret the flow of data in the data. It answers questions like, are our sales going up or down? Or how are the averages looking in comparison to the results each month? There are several different types of trend lines to choose from. Let's look at a couple of examples. Here is an example of an exponential trend line. This type of trend line is curved to show data rising or falling at constant rates. And this is an example of a linear trend line. This trend line is used to show simple linear data sets. It is a way to illustrate that something is increasing or decreasing over time. Let's add a trend line chart in your worksheet. Select your chart, then click on the Chart Element option. Now select the Trend Line option and then select the type of trend line from the options provided. Alternatively, you can use the Chart Elements icon in the top right-hand corner of your chart to add a trend line from the options provided. Once you've added a trend line to your chart, you can easily modify it. Click on your chart to select it. Next, click on the trend line to select it. The Format Trend Line task pane appears. Here you can use the various options to add to and modify your trend line. You can also use the contextual format ribbon to adjust the color of your trend line. Well done, you have completed this lesson. In this lesson, you learned how to select and create basic charts in Excel. You also learned how to modify and format your chart and added trend line elements. Later, you will learn more on analysing data using pivot tables. See you soon. So far, you've learned that Thomas was able to create and modify tables, use table references, manage large workbooks, and visualize data with basic charts. In our scenario, we saw that Thomas was tasked with analysing some sales data. In this lesson, you will explore how Thomas can use one of the most powerful tools in Excel, pivot table. Pivot tables are extremely useful and interactive and can generate real insights into your data. If you've never used them before, they can seem a little daunting, but once you understand the basic principles, they are easy to construct. For this reason, it is important to know how they work and gain some understanding of their purpose before creating pivot tables of your own data. With this scenario in mind, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to create a pivot table, summarize data in a pivot table, format a pivot table, identify external data and power pivot functions, and use slicers to filter data. Let's go ahead and explore pivot tables. Pivot tables allow you to summarize or analyze large blocks of data and generate a table of results. You may be wondering why pivot tables are called pivot tables. Because they let you move data around easily by dragging and dropping fields to perform a sort of rotation on the structure of your table and at the same time change your view of the data. With pivot tables, columns can become rows and rows can become columns, all without altering the original data. When you create a pivot table, you are given the option to place it on the worksheet that you currently have open or on a new one. In either case, after you create your pivot table, you can pivot, repivot, sort and summarize your data without affecting it directly. You can choose the level of detail that you want to view depending on your needs. You also have access to all of the summary functions in Excel to complete your data analysis. For example, you can have a pivot table where the SKU or stock keeping unit in the first column, quantity and value columns, have been pivoted to appear as rows. A summary of each numerical column in the pivot table is displayed by default. Before you even create a pivot table, you need to think of the questions that you are trying to answer by using it. Just like when you are working with functions or formulas, half of the work in data analysis is finding the right questions. This process is especially important for pivot tables because how you construct them depends on the question that you are asking. Once you know the question that you would like the pivot table to answer, you can start constructing the pivot table. While there are no hard and fast rules to constructing a pivot table, there are some ways to make it easier. Here are a few tips to keep in mind when you're constructing your pivot table. First, it is usually best to create rows and columns using fields that have a relatively low set number of entries. Using entries that span a huge swathe of data, such as 5 years of transaction numbers, to create rows and columns can only cause confusion rather than answer any specific questions. Next, it is almost always a good idea to create a row out of a field that you need an answer from, and then create a column out of that criterion to narrow down the answer. For example, you can have a range that contains 34 rows of data about product SKUs or stock keeping units, their warehouse location, their quantities and their value. If you create a pivot table from this data set, it answers the question, what is the total value of the products stored in each warehouse? In this example, the warehouses are listed by row and the value or the criterion is listed as a column. A sum function automatically totals the value of each SKU stored by each warehouse. When you want to answer a question, you can change the function that is used by the pivot table. For example, suppose you want to see how many different products each warehouse has, not a total count. You could do this by adding the SKU field as a column and applying the count function. Let's now look at the Create Pivot Table dialog box. The first step to creating a pivot table is to open the Create Pivot Table dialog box by clicking Insert, then Pivot Table. You can use the controls in the Create Pivot Table dialog box to choose the dataset or data source for the new pivot table that you are creating and where you want it to be placed. By default, new pivot tables are placed on new worksheets, but you do have the option of adding them to your existing worksheets in your workbook. After you select your options, click OK to create the pivot table. You'll notice that in the worksheet area, your cursor is now sitting in a placeholder. This is the area where the pivot table will appear, and it will flex to hold any number of rows or columns of results. Now that you've created your pivot table, let's look at the Pivot Table Field task pane. The Pivot Table Field task pane is the primary tool that you will use to configure pivot tables. Note that it is hidden when the pivot table is not selected. First, the top portion of this pane lists all of the fields from the dataset that you can add to the pivot table. To add or remove a field from the pivot table, toggle the corresponding checkbox. Or to give you more control over field placement on the pivot table, you can click and drag these fields to the pivot table itself. Note that field names are derived from the column header in the dataset. Next, the bottom half of this pane has 4 areas: filters, columns, rows, and values. If you drag fields between these areas, you can change the structure of the pivot table and choose the values that will be used to make calculations. Let's take a closer look at these 4 areas. Adding fields to the filters area will include those field values as filter criteria. The columns area will create columns out of unique field entries. Similarly, the rows area will create rows out of unique field entries. Finally, fields that are dragged to the values area will have calculations performed on them or their values summarized. Note that any fields that appear in these 4 areas will include a pull-down arrow that gives you access to a number of different settings, and the Field Settings dialog box, which you can use to further customize your pivot table. Remember that any changes that you make in the pivot table field task pane are applied dynamically. Now let's look at how you can summarize data in a pivot table. When you combine options from the Summarize Values By and the Show Values As tabs on the Value Field Settings dialog box, it provides further insight into your data. For example, suppose that you want to calculate the total unit price of all the products that each warehouse is storing. You can do this by dragging the unit price field to the Values area of the pivot table field task pane. Notice that it has already calculated an overall total, and this is now visible in the pivot table in the worksheet. But how is this result being calculated? If you click the drop-down arrow for this field and click the Field Settings option to open the Value Field Settings dialog box, you can see that sum is the default function. You can change how Excel is analysing the data by selecting a different function such as average. Now, whatever heading is added to the rows box, the overall total will be broken down into a series of subtotals by that heading. Drag the warehouse heading into the rows box and the pivot table then displays the sum of the unit prices found in each warehouse. Pivot tables are an excellent tool to quickly summarize large amounts of data, but because they are dynamic, it may seem difficult to use the pivot table results in other parts of your workbook. Fortunately, Excel has a function to do just that. You can retrieve results from pivot tables in other parts of your workbook using the getPivotData function. The syntax is getPivotData open parentheses, then the data field, the pivot table, and finally the fields and items. This syntax may seem complicated, but Excel simplifies the process of building the function by automatically inserting it. When you select a cell outside of the pivot table, even in another worksheet or workbook, and type the equal sign, then click on the field in the pivot table that contains the value you want to retrieve, Excel automatically inserts the getPivotData function with the correct syntax. For example, if you select cell D2, typing equals, then clicking on cell B9, which contains the sum of the value of the SKU 1567, it will create the getPivotData function automatically. The value of this function is that it will return the correct value as long as it remains visible in the pivot table. Now that we have seen how to use the Summarize Values By tab or the Value Field Settings dialog box, let's use the same example and suppose that you want to see the percentage of the total inventory value that each warehouse holds. You could do this calculation manually, but it would be easier to change how the values are shown. Within the Show Values As tab of the Value Field Settings dialog box, you would click the percentage of grand total option from the Show Values As drop-down menu. You will now see what percentage of the grand total each warehouse holds. In this case, you can see that warehouse A contains products with a larger value, while warehouse C has the lowest value. When you are working with pivot tables, you will see two contextual tabs. Let's focus on the Design tab. In the Design tab, you can add layout elements to your pivot table, customize style options, and apply a style in the same way that you would with a regular table. You can modify these options at any time. But what if your data is outside of Excel? For example, an Excel spreadsheet can only hold 1.5 million rows of data. What if you're working with population data and you have millions of rows of data? If the data that you would like to analyze exists outside of Excel, such as in a Microsoft Access database, you can still use pivot tables to summarize it. To do this, use an already established connection to that data by opening the Create Pivot Table dialog box and then clicking the Use an External Data Source radio button. Next, click the Choose Connection button. In the Existing Connections dialog box, you can choose from existing connections that exist and browse for more connections. Now let's look at Power Pivot. Power Pivot is an add-in that is available for Excel 365. It is additional software that is included with some editions of Excel 365, but by default, it is not enabled. When it is not included, it can be added later if required. After you install it, Power Pivot extends the functionality of Excel to allow for greater data analysis. What makes Power Pivot special is that it uses compression and processing algorithms that allow you to work efficiently with large amounts of data. This facilitates analysis with data that would otherwise be too cumbersome to work with. Power Pivot also facilitates the integration of data from multiple sources and has been designed with extra features and flexibility for environments that rely on Microsoft SharePoint and/or Microsoft SQL servers. So, does Power Pivot use the same functions that you are familiar with from working in Excel? Power Pivot draws data from multiple sources. Because it is analyzing information from 2 or more linked tables, it is what is known as a relational database. The Excel functions that you have seen in previous lessons are designed to work in the more limited environment of rows and columns in a workbook. Power Pivot creates its formulas and functions in a language called DAX, Data Analysis Expression, that can be used to work with relational data in a much more powerful manner. For example, this DAX expression joins 2 tables to return the total sales for the current quarter. You would use total QTD and the sum total of the employee's sales within a specific date range. You will find a brief summary of DAX categories of functions that you can access as a reading material after this video. You've learned that Thomas was able to use pivot tables to analyze data in Excel. Now let's see how he can use slicers to filter his data. You probably know that regular filters in Excel can be effective in obtaining more detail from your data, but probably also know that they can quickly become a chore to manage. Between having to clear existing filters before applying new ones and trying to determine which data is actively being filtered out, filters definitely have some downsides. To give you more control over filtering capabilities, Excel provides slicers. Slicers are easy-to-use filters that can be applied multiple times without negative effects on the data's readability. Slicers can be great help when working with pivot table data. While the main purpose of pivot tables is to help you analyze information and find patterns or trends that might be difficult to spot in a large volume of raw data, the slicer tool takes this idea to the next level. You can create slicers out of any field that exists within the dataset for the pivot table. You can then use these slicers to filter each field by its unique entries. For example, if you wanted to filter out data from one of the 3 warehouses in a worksheet that tracks inventory, a slicer would be able to do that for you easily. Slicers can also be linked to more than one pivot table. Situations like this usually occur when you are using raw transactional data as a dataset and when you have multiple pivot tables for that data. Slicers are displayed graphically as a small pane that contains a series of buttons that represent each unique value from the field that the slicer is associated with. You can toggle between filtering and not filtering unique values from the field by simply clicking these buttons. Filters in a slicer that are not applied appear blue, while those that are white are active. If a filter button is grayed out, this indicates that an already active filter has removed the values represented by this filter from view. You can apply multiple filters that exist in the same slicer at once by holding down the Control key and clicking on each filter that you would like to apply. Now let's explore how you can insert slicers. Slicers are graphics that can be moved, resized like charts. They also have their own format ribbon, so can be customized to different colors. To create a slicer, first click anywhere in the pivot table to display the Pivot Table Tools tabs. Next, click Insert, then Slicer. You can also click Table Design, then Insert Slicer to insert a slicer when working with tables. This action displays the Insert Slicers dialog box. This dialog box lists each field in the pivot table with a checkbox. You can create a slicer from a field by checking its associated checkbox. After you've finished choosing the fields that you would like to appear as filters, click OK to apply your settings. When you return to the worksheet, you will now see the slicers placed there.
Thank you for watching our video. We hope you found it helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share it with them. We would love to hear your thoughts on this learning course, so please leave a comment below. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.